Hello, and welcome to Burst the Bubble UK, the podcast that attempts to burst the bubble between ethnic communities and promote interfaith conversation. My name's Lawrence. I'm joined by Ahsen, a PhD student at Bart and the London, and a volunteer for MentorWise, and Rabbi Bentzi Studak, a leader within Chabad, a Jewish organization worldwide that helps to make Jewish life easier. So living in sort of the secular Western world, while also being a practicing Muslim or a Jew, do you feel that there's a contrast between your daily life and your religious life?
Go ahead.
I don't necessarily think so, actually. Islam is a way of life through submission to God. So I think that it's easy enough to kind of integrate that into daily life. And in some ways, I feel almost luckier than some people, perhaps in the Middle East, who don't have the same luxuries that I do, like freedom of speech, for example, the ability to practice your religion freely. So I can take the time out during my day to go and pray, do my daily prayers. I think maybe one thing growing up as a Muslim when I was younger, that may have been like a contrast, not to my own kind of daily life, but to that of my peers. So I grew up in Kent. And I was basically one of the only Muslims at school. So there was a contrast in our understanding of kind of what socializing meant and what we did in our free time. So there was that kind of struggle growing up, because very quickly on people chose to do different things in their free time. So that was a contrast for me. And I think something that probably a lot of Muslims struggle with, especially if they are the minority in where they live. But at the moment, I'm quite happy with how I can practice my religion as a Muslim in the West, and I'm comfortable in doing so. What do you think?
Yeah, look, I think we're very lucky. I mean, for me as a Jew, if you look throughout Jewish history, we're probably the first time in many, many years where Jews, wherever they are, I'm talking about many, maybe 2,000 years, where Jews, wherever they live around the world, in large numbers or in a community, significant numbers, are free to practice. When I was growing up, we had cousins who were stuck behind the Iron Curtain in Russia. We couldn't even speak to them. We could not get in touch with them with letters or anything else. And they had zero access to religion. It was forbidden. My grandfather escaped after being sent to Siberian camps for practicing his religion, and other members of my family were killed for that. And today, you could just practice freely. So first of all, I mean, contrasting that with, like you were saying, other people in other countries today don't have the freedom, or Jewish people in history who didn't have till almost 20 years ago. So I think once you're looking at that backdrop, any difficulties or challenges that we might have in the West or in England or other free countries, when you look at the history or what other people are going through, you're embarrassed to even say that there's a problem or there's a contrast. But on a deeper, more philosophical level, I think when you look at religion and daily life as two separate things, I think that's already coming from a different angle. Because at least the way I see my religion is guiding me as a human being living in the world. It's not two separate things. And therefore, it's not just in the synagogue or in the mosque. I don't know, I'm not going to say my philosophy on Islam or Christianity, but as a Jew, I'm talking. So the idea of the religion is each human being is here in this world for their unique purpose. And their unique purpose cannot be fulfilled by any other human being who has ever lived or who is alive in the world. You have your unique mission, your unique purpose in life, wherever your destiny guides you. And every step of the way, all your interactions are there for a purpose. And your religion, whatever it may be, guides you to make those right decisions and be that like a link between heaven and earth. There's a heavenly religion, a religion that came down from God, instructions from God, and how you as a human being, an earthly being, should conduct yourself in this life. So to say that there's, how do they interact, the two interact, really the two are one. Because by interacting with the world and being making the world a better place is what every human being's every purpose is. I mean, Ahsen embarrassed me almost, because before the show started, we were talking about you could say what your PhD student, she's hopefully developing a drug that's going to save so many people's lives. I don't see that as anything separate from religion. That's guided by our faith, by belief. So, in my opinion, the way I would look at it, when you're going to the lab, it's wholly like going to the mosque. It's you're actually doing God's work. So it's not that there's two separate, disconnected things. Your interactions on a day-to-day level, and even if you're not somebody who's developing a cure to a disease or a medicine or something else, being another human, interacting with other human beings in a way that makes their day better, in a way that just people are just happier because they saw you today. That's God's work.
So within that specifically, so do you think that technology and other sort of modern developments like that, do you think that is harmful to your religion, or do you think that it enhances your religion?
In terms of technology, I think nowadays it would be impossible to live without it, and I'm in favour of all modern developments because I think it can play a huge role in allowing you to develop your own belief. You can connect with so many people across the world that you wouldn't otherwise be able to do without it, and I think that's really important. And I think also as people of faith, people who practice their religion, it's important to use that in a positive way. For instance, for me, it was really important to keep up with, YouTubers or people who are social media influencers. For me, that was important, to connect with people that you can relate to, because when you can't relate to others around you, you feel that need to connect with others. I think technology has way more pros than cons for me.
You're talking about helped you connect with other people who are religious.
Who are religious or who shared other aspects of my identity or faith, or
So growing up in Kent,
yes,
did you connect with other Muslims from other places on the internet?
For example, my friends in London. Even simple things like FaceTime, for example, allows me to connect with family members who I can't physically visit, who are in different parts of the world, who you don't always physically have the ability to go and see. And I think that's a blessing, because there's people, grandparents who aren't able to see their grandkids grow up, and it's really sad for various reasons, whether that be war or other forms of upheaval in several parts of the world, like Turkey, for example.
Right.
Things like FaceTime and other means of connecting are really important, not just for faith, but for other aspects of someone's identity. That sense of belonging, family is really important for me, I think.
I agree with you, by the way. I think on the same lines. I think this, I don't understand why, but this is a little bit, some people view the internet as a threat. I view the internet as one of the best things that has happened to Judaism, or any religion for that matter. But as a Jew, speaking from something as simple as, first of all, keeping in touch with people. So my background, one of my first jobs was a creative director for the first Jewish website on the internet. And we had people who were so remote, there was no connection to a synagogue. We had asked the rabbi at that time, probably now today, many, many more, because they have millions of users now. It's Chabad.org, the Chabad website. We had 200-300 people asking questions every day that they would never be able to ask face-to-face to a rabbi. Some of these questions were life and death situations with people going through mental issues, and they had professionals working on it. That would never have been possible without the internet. Kosher food, for example, there's an app that I could find on my phone where it will tell me the closest place to buy a kosher sandwich anywhere in the world. It would never been possible. And the possibilities are endless. I think, some people probably have view internet as a bit of a threat, but I think what internet has done is it's enhanced life and reality to a completely new level. So therefore, everything that exists is enhanced, including the negative. So yes, there was people say the internet's terrible. Look at all the hatred on the internet, or look at whatever else, the people getting, trapped or scammed or hurt, etc., etc. All of those things kind of existed on a much smaller scale. It just amplified everything. So just like it amplified the negative, it amplified the positive, even at a greater level.
I think what could be seen as a threat, especially now, is, for example, things like artificial intelligence, because people are working to develop that further. And I think for everyone, not just religious people, the thought that humans are creating something that has higher intelligence than potentially we have is terrifying. So what do you feel about that? Do you think that's a threat to faith communities or humans in general?
A lot of people, the immediate threat, I think, that we have to deal with, I'm talking to younger people, is, I think, the jobs. And, people today choosing a career that they're studying for may end up finding 10 years down the line that career is completely automated. So I think the first, what you're talking about is, robots taking over the world. I'm not, it's not in the immediate term. What's really in the immediate term is there are students choosing courses, choosing things that they're going to study, and really that has to be at the forefront of people's minds when you're in school. Make sure that that there's someone I know. He a guy called Daniel Susskind and Richard Susskind, the father and son. I think they lecture in Oxford. They wrote a book about this. I think one of the things he told me is the safest job today is a barber, because it's physical, you talk, etc. But that's a bit radical. But so many jobs that people are putting so much effort into today to study and to have the background for, you need, I think, people need to be able to prepare for that. That's not a religious thing. That's just a human thing. But look, we've come so far as humanity. The world has changed so much in the past 2 centuries that life as it was 200 years ago is impossible with today's technology. But life adapts, and I think we will adapt. I think as humans we'll adapt. The question is if we adapt at the same speed as technology. But it will free us up. It will probably make quality of life better. It will scientists are working on looking at aging as a disease and curing aging. The world is going to change in incredible ways. It will not be recognizable, but I think we're going to adapt. I'm not worried. One interesting thing about technology and religion, I think I was talking to your friend Jonathan yesterday, and he mentioned Shabbat. Are you familiar with what Shabbat is? Yeah. So Shabbat, for those listeners who may not know, is the Sabbath. So for Jews, it's on Friday night from sunset on Friday until sundown till nightfall on Saturday. We have a day of rest. It's a day where you spend with your family, spend in spiritual pursuits, etc. And we don't use technology. Nothing. Now people say that is incredibly difficult. We're using our phones the whole time, and perhaps the internet has become a threat to Shabbat because people feel the need to use their phones. They can do everything else besides being on the phones. And I take it the other way around. I say, what the internet has done for Shabbat is incredible, because never before have we been able to enjoy that day of rest as we are today, because you never had that contrast. 200 years ago, you couldn't just, the shtetl was the little village where Jews used to live. It was called a shtetl, little remote villages, and everyone knew each other. Now, on Shabbat, you still saw the guy you were doing business with. You still saw the milkman you owed money to. You still saw the neighbor that you didn't get along with, or whatever life was. You couldn't unplug the world and just retreat, become yourself. You didn't need, yes, there was no technology, but the big plus is that today we are so bombarded with technology. We actually need that detox time And we actually can have a real day of rest by flicking off life almost for 24 hours, shutting the world off. You couldn't shut the world off before you had technology. So I think the contrast of rest and non-rest. The CEO of Netflix, if I'm not mistaken, I could be misquoting, so I hope he doesn't sue me for this, but he was asked, who is your competitor, your greatest competitor? You know what he said? He said sleep.
Wow.
Now let that sink in for a minute. He said sleep is his biggest competitor. That means people are dying to fall asleep. They've got a full day ahead, but he wants you to binge watch and be up all night. If that is a threat in a way, and that means that we actually do need that once in a while. You need that detox, and that, I think, is what the internet has made Shabbat much more valuable.
I couldn't agree more about the unplugging. For me, so we don't have a Shabbat equivalent as such, but going away on spiritual retreats numerous times in a year for periods of about a week up to 2 weeks, I certainly spend less time on my phone, for example. I usually don't take my laptop with me, and the effect that I feel, that spiritual awakening, is incredible. And like you said, I don't think we would feel that effect if we didn't have technology to start with. Exactly,
yeah, the contrast.
To compare the two.
So what do you do? What's a spiritual retreat? You go
So we
far?
go to usually more remote areas, usually outside of the city, in nature.
In England, or?
And it can be in England, it can be abroad, depending on availability. So over Christmas I went to Ireland in the countryside, and even last weekend it wasn't a spiritual retreat, but I went away to the Cotswolds, and just going outside of London, staying somewhere more quiet, like spending less time on my laptop checking emails and on my phone, and not analyzing data on the computer. It just felt so good. So I think that to compare how you are day to day with technology, of course it's important to kind of stay in the loop and use technology for positive things. It is also important to unwind sometimes, and you can feel the difference between the two because of it, because of its presence.
I've never done this, but have you ever gone away for one of these breaks and completely disconnected?
I take my phone with me, but I try not to spend time on it. So I'll check it for half an hour at the end of the day, and usually ignore most messages and try not to respond to people. And then you get a big backlog of things to respond to when you come back. I
think one of the presenters on LBC, I'm not sure who it is, I think it was Nick Ferrari or one of them, he tried this challenge to do, he's not Jewish, but he wanted to do Shabbat once. And he describes the whole thing, and he says, I turned it on afterwards and I saw all the missed calls and emails, and I said, his last lines of the article are, I realized I didn't miss them at all. But I think there's a bit of an anxiety that we have when we don't check our phones. So, that's why people probably find it very, very challenging to do that.
So what do you think is the hardest challenge in your daily life from a religious perspective?
For me, it's being a visible Muslim. I think a day-to-day struggle that I have, and probably the biggest one. Not because I find it difficult to wear the hijab, etc., but it's the weight and responsibility that comes with it. So being recognized as a person who belongs to a certain faith before anything else, before the way you speak or the way you are, your personality, your intelligence, before any of that, a stranger walking on the street who sees me or you in the way that you are, they will identify you with a certain faith. And sometimes you just don't want to carry that weight. For me that's the biggest kind of struggle, because of the negative connotations around Islam and the way that people see the faith. I feel like I have a responsibility to change that and to break the stereotype, and that can sometimes be very overwhelming.
But it can also, I can appreciate that, because there are parts of London that I feel very threatened going through. I was growing up as a kid, but it never really bothered me. I just took it as a way of life. I did never, people yelling it from cars or whatever. It never really jolted me. It was like, whatever, that's just just the way the world is. But the way you presented that sounded more like an empowerment than a burden,
Yeah.
a responsibility. You used that word twice.
Yes. Interestingly.
Do you feel empowered to be able to change that? Like, I'm walking around the way I am, and therefore, because I'm walking around this way, I am empowered to make a difference.
Yeah, I feel that that's one of the main kind of motivations that I have. And in fact, when I decided to wear the head covering, because I consider the hijab doesn't just mean a headscarf, it means a lot of things, your modesty, your character, and all these things. And men also have to practice hijab through different ways.
What does
But
the
for
word
me,
hijab mean?
It
When you
means,
say men have to practice hijab.
so it's like modesty, how
Right.
you are, the ways that you are modest. So the head covering is a part of that modesty, but it's not the definition, and it doesn't make you a non-Muslim if you don't wear a headscarf. So when I decided to wear one, of course, God orders you in the Quran to cover your head and to wear loose clothing. But I even had objections from family members who thought that the burden would be too much for me to carry. At the age of 16, that's when I decided to wear it. So in Kent, I felt incredibly empowered because obviously I'd moved to England as a child. I was 10 when I came here.
From where?
From Turkey. So I learnt English, and I was always kind of trying to catch up with my classmates. And when I eventually did, I performed quite well in exams, etc. And that happened to be at the same time that I decided to wear a headscarf. So that for me was like super empowering, and I thought that God was like rewarding me with my exam results for doing something for him.
Oh, wow.
But then when I moved to London, obviously there's a lot more Muslim people, visibly Muslim people around. And then, I started to see kind of faults in people and things that I wasn't so keen on, like,
Well,
I don't know, people
other
like
religious people.
other Muslims like littering and wearing the headscarf and littering. I was like, how can you possibly do that? It was like baffling to me seeing that kind of behavior. So I was like, I have a responsibility to change people's views on that. But now I think sometimes, like, when you get older and you enter the real world, like working life or academia, and there are fewer and fewer people who look like you, going up the academia ladder. For me, for example, it becomes more and more difficult to have to prove yourself. That, I think, for me is a challenge, because
After how long? When people who get to know you on your team, you probably
so after you start speaking and after you hold a conversation with people, you can see that changes. But when you speak English without an accent, for example, you can kind of see the switch in people's thoughts. And some of my colleagues have said that to me, because we're good friends enough to have these conversations. And he says, like, oh, you look very, you dress in a modern way, but you're not quite there yet, because you still look like a Middle Eastern kind of person because of the head covering, for example, but you have very Western thoughts and you seem quite progressive. So people just have these opinions of you.
That's actually the opposite. When they say you're not quite there yet, it's almost as if you're aspiring to go that way, but you've chosen this. When your family growing up, did anyone else wear the headscarf?
So my mum did. My mum wore a headscarf, but she never, when I told her I wanted to also wear it, she was surprised, like, oh, really? Are you sure? I didn't think you would at this age particularly. I think culturally, Turkish people wear it when they're slightly older, or, it's different for different cultures, and it means different things to different people. But for me, it was that, obviously, modesty as well. But I think modesty is more your actions than your outer appearance. So, like you said, there is a sense of empowerment, especially when people assume that Muslim women are oppressed because they choose to cover themselves. When society reduces women to sexualized objects, and you choose to cover for the sake of God, I think that is the complete opposite of oppression. But yeah, the need or the feeling that I have to prove that to the world just gets tiring. That for me is a challenge.
Yeah, but I think every day, if you think about it, every day you probably interact with someone who you've pushed the needle just a little bit. You've made that little bit of change. If you think about that afterwards, it's pretty incredible.
Yeah, I guess.
Yeah.
What about you?
What about me? Challenges of being a religious person. Like I said earlier, there are certain things that I went through as a kid, even today sometimes, but I'm used to it. And also I've noticed that people judge everybody. It's not just from religion. Anyone who's a bit different to them, if you dress different, if you in a certain part of London and you have an accent from another part of London, they're going to judge you based just on which kind of British accent you have. People are very, very judgmental. I try not to be in my own life. So that helps me. Sometimes there are practical things like finding kosher food or things like that. But in general, again, I think it's about perspective, how we view things. So you can be going through it and it's a challenge, or it's a problem, or it's difficult. But actually, when you realize, if I think once, like you said, it's a similar. Once you believe that you're standing for something, and that there's something that you are for, and there's something that you stand for, and there's something that there's a value behind you. So then, whatever it is you go through, whatever challenges they go through, they don't seem so challenging as for somebody else who either is not from your mindset, or someone who does what you're doing but doesn't have that goal, that vision, that mission. Once you have that, the purpose. There's a purpose why I'm doing this. If you're running a marathon, I'm doing this to get fit. You don't. Of course, anything you're finding a drug, right? Oh, it's so terrible. You poor thing. You're sitting in the lab and nothing's working. Yeah, but one day I'm going to have the breakthrough. No one thinks, oh, poor me. I'm going to have to go to the lab every day. So if you've got that perspective of your religion, then the difficulties don't feel difficult anymore. So I don't. If you ask me, I saw this question on the way. I didn't even know what to answer really. There are technical things, but it doesn't. Very insightful the way you were saying that. I think that was beautiful what you said. And I think if there's any purpose of this podcast, what you just said about the hijab is incredible.
Thank you very much both for your time. Really interesting conversation. Thank you very much.
Thank
It's
you.
been great.
Thank you for having us.